Welcome back to the Pillar Performance Podcast. This is Jared from Team Pillar, and today's a special episode that we are naming the Cool Down. We named this because after a workout, you usually use the last 15 to 20 minutes to slow down, bring your heart rate to normal, and remove any waste products from the body. Today's workout will be Damo and Pip diving into the latest sleep research from neuroscientist Matt Walker. They'll go into the recommendations to optimize sleep and then cool down/debrief as to whether or not it's practical information for the everyday person. Hope you all enjoy.
So guys, what we wanted to chat today with, and obviously those who do know Pip, our performance dietitian at Pillar, a performance dietitian across so many disciplines, professional triathlete as well. So Pip is our voice of resource at so many things we like to do here at Pillar for so many of our customers who utilise Pip's expertise in not only the space of nutrition, but her background as an endurance athlete, a performance dietitian as well. Work so closely with a lot of our customers. So every time we get Pip on the podcast to talk through some topics that is one of the things that's always trending in the company, and sleep is obviously right on the forefront of what we want to be educating people on at the moment. And today we're going to continue on with the trend of sleep, and we're going to dive into sleep hygiene, which for people is a frustrating term. I know for Pip it is. But let's think about sleep hygiene as very much like dental hygiene, which is old as well. But Pip, why don't we start there with sleep hygiene? You don't like that term?
I don't like the term, and only because it sounds really clinical. And to me, sleep is such a natural, biological, primal thing. And whenever I think hygiene, literally it's like you're at the dentist. So for me, it just feels like a really clunky word to use in that space. So I think it kind of takes away from some of the intuition that we should have about sleep and sleep cycles. But then, I understand where it comes from too. It's about cleaning up probably some of the ways we've added to life, technology and work structures and changes. So let's dig in.
And guys, so what we are trying to say here is I'm actually really keen. I follow a neuroscientist out of the University of Berkeley, Matt Walker, and I'm sure a lot of you have read Matt Walker's book, While We Sleep. For those of you who haven't, it is without a doubt the hands down greatest resource you could find on decoding sleep, insomnia, being able to optimize your sleep. I think it is a fantastic, fantastic book. If you don't have the time to read, Matt himself has done, he now has a podcast, which is really unique. He basically bite-sized chunks down the important parts of that. He's done plenty of TED Talks, so you can look him up. For Pip and I, from our perspective, neither of us are medical doctors, and Matt himself also will say this, and none of the content on the podcast or our advice, they're purely our own opinions. It's not medical advice in any way, shape or form. So we just want to make sure for that perspective, we're not being prescriptive. We are purely going to be talking about what we've read, what's worked for us, what we know other athletes are adopting, and obviously what the science out there is saying. So today, Pip, I want to talk to you a little bit. Let's call it hygiene, but at the same time, we know that word is quite restrictive. But in terms of kind of your experience, what are some of the ways, some of the key ways that you can improve the process of sleep? And maybe the process is probably actually one of the answers to this. So what are some of the things, let's start to talk about the points that you would adopt to try and help people who may struggle with sleep?
Yeah, so I guess, from my perspective, often when I'm talking to people, they are coming in from the position of nutrition and what can I do, food-wise to be eating around better sleep. But there's much more holistic approach. And sometimes we get really stuck on that period before bed, and it starts much, much earlier than that. So for me, it starts some of the cycle, and things that you're looking at are when you're getting up in the morning, what are you doing? Because we know that morning sunlight is really key. That's a real key part in setting that cycle and structure for the day. Are you getting outside, getting exercise, getting fresh air? They start to form part of that picture early on in the day before you get anywhere near the afternoon or the evening.
I know Matt Walker himself, the number one point he says is regularity. He says regularity is key, and I think that's also essentially what you're saying there as well. He was saying the brain essentially has its own 24-hour clock. He called it the suprachiasmatic nucleus in terms of your body understanding and it starts to learn. So being able to wake up and go to sleep at the same time. And I remember we were always told this as athletes, it's probably the number one thing. And that's what you're saying. Stick to this wake up at the same time, in and around, obviously, when the daylight comes. Is that essentially that point there? And what he's saying, like the regularity of it?
Yeah, I mean, you had very fancy words for it. The way that I kind of think about sleep is, and the learning that I have done as well, is about sleep pressure. So throughout the day, energy production and that ATP production has a byproduct. I'm getting my words mixed up. Adenosine is the byproduct of ATP production. So throughout the days, you're using energy, you're training, you've got this buildup of adenosine. That acts on the brain as like a sleep pressure to make you feel more sleepy. So caffeine blocks those receptors. So that's why you start to feel alert from that. And naps can reduce that sleep pressure. So you get that build up throughout the day, makes you sleep, you get the regeneration throughout the night. So you're coming back on that 24-hour cycle. The other part is what you were probably referring to as well, is that circadian rhythm, that you have that natural ebb and flow, and you see, rise and fall of certain hormones as well, that really start to set that structure of when you're naturally going to want to be falling asleep and when you're naturally going to be waking up.
And I'll probably I think this is probably the most realist. And when we talk about sleep hygiene, we have to be real, because Matt talks about, a best in class scenario format. But realistically, his fifth point, and he always puts a lot of emphasis, he says no alcohol at night and no caffeine after 12, I think he says. Maybe call it 12 or 1 p.m. That both of those, I don't tick those boxes at all. Why my Wood scores are so poor as well. But in terms of realist, that's what you're saying as well. That caffeine, maybe dive in a little bit. So the caffeine obviously is the suppression of the adenosine, which obviously then allows you to feel that, feel awake to a certain extent. But what you're doing is just prolonging that sleep pressure on you, which then affects that's when you go to sleep.
Exactly, you're prolonging it, and you're masking your body's need for that rest and rejuvenation that comes with actual deep sleep.
So, guys, what we're trying to say there is obviously the regularity of your wake up and go and bed cycle, vitally important to be able to train your body into trying to stay in its rhythm as well. And then within that, trying to have those factors of the no caffeine in the afternoon, which affects adenosine as well, which we know, and then the no alcohol in the evening is a tough one for a lot of people to swallow. And I think there is some amazing science around even a small consumption of alcohol can have dramatic impacts on the quality of sleep, not so much the quantity. The quantity, people will often find, oh, wow, I sleep for a certain amount of time and nothing really changes their PIP. But I think the alcohol is a really clear factor in what it does for the quality of that sleep. So people often feel like, I've had a couple of drinks, I've slept, same amount of hours. But if you're actually sleep tracking, you're really to, dive in neurologically in terms of your sleep, it has a great effect on it.
Yeah, you're right. And it does always surprise people, because they kind of think, a glass or 2 or 3 will just relax me or make me pass out and I'll have a better sleep. But it is affecting that quality. You're actually waking up even without knowing it throughout the night and affecting that.
What I find really interesting, I was talking to someone the other day. We were discussing the circadian rhythm cycle for performance, and essentially when there was a really interesting one where it's like there was a certain amount of time in the afternoon where, cognitively, I think it was between 3 or 4 p.m. where cognitively or strength-wise, the body was able to adapt, and that was your number one most effective time for performance. And it was always astounding to me why particularly professional football leagues around the world, like soccer being the highest paid sport on earth, will start games at 9:30 at night. It's for me, it was mind blowing to think they obviously want the greatest on the field for the greatest, for the greatest outcome, and yet they're putting it on so far at night. So it's like, okay, biologically we know that's not going to curate the greatest performance from the players, but Jesus, good broadcast time, and that overweighs anything. Yeah, which is hilarious. So, guys, point number 2 that Matt always talks about, and me personally, this one without a doubt works for me, and it's not incredibly practical when you have a partner who doesn't work on the same body temperature as yourself, and that is essentially the temperature regulation around sleep. And what Matt and the advice says from why we sleep, and he goes on about it quite a lot, down to the point where he believes that the brain and the body need to drop within, I think it's about 1 degree Celsius, 2 to 3 degrees Fahrenheit. Your body actually can have an incredibly positive effect to be able to fall asleep and stay asleep if you're able to drop your body temperature. And I tested this because I found it worked. Like, I love going to sleep in a really Arctic room. Like, I really do. Whereas Jade, my wife, the exact opposite. So it doesn't work really well. Matt has a really good little hack for this, for those people in those kind of relationships. He says, so you don't have to drop your room temperature, even though he does recommend about 18.5 degrees for a room temperature. It's very cold for a lot of people. I mean, most people go, 23 degrees. If you have children, like, you'd never put their room at 18.5, but that's apparently where they said it has to be. But if you want to actually speed up the process or allow yourself not to have your room at that temperature, he said, try having a hot bath or a very hot shower before. So you actually take your core body temperature up and then drop it down to a relatively standard level instead of having to make your bedroom an Arctic tundra. I found it works really well for me. Yeah. Have you tried that?
Yes, absolutely. And that thing too, I certainly remember times in the footy club, that was one of the intervention strategies that we'd try with the boys, trying to get them to sleep, and particularly when they're away and travelling for games, and as you would know too, that's when sleep becomes really quite messy and challenging. So those little strategies in the toolkit are super helpful.
And I find that the idea of that as a process is like, it's actually, for me, very natural.
Yeah.
That shower starts, or is that the last thing you do? You're already in your bathroom. Most of the time people are brushing their teeth. If you do have dental hygiene, most people are finishing the day brushing their teeth. So you're in the bathroom. It's a very easy step to take to quickly jump in the shower, have a relatively hot, as opposed to all the science that says, about cold, all the vagus nerves and having cold baths. Do not have them just before you go to sleep. Heat your body up, and then at best practice, try and walk into a 18.5 degree bedroom, and you'll start to see a very nice drop in temperature in terms of then being able to fall asleep and essentially stay asleep as well. Yeah. So that's a really good one to try as well, guys. And I highly recommend it. It's done wonders for me as well. The next one I think is again very difficult to implement around the world, particularly when you think Scandinavian countries, middle of summer, and that is darkness. And essentially, we all know that we need darkness to trigger the hormone melatonin. I think it's probably a biological reason we all have eyelids. Some stage, probably to keep sand out of our eyes, I think is why it happened. But there's got to be a reason as well to actually block out light. But not as easy said than done. Very easy when you're staying in a hotel. Most hotels have block out blinds. Not many people. Some, if you're in a rental, not every rental bothers to invest in block out blinds. Yeah, which is difficult. Do you, what's your recommendation on darkness? Does it work for you? You sleep complete block out blinds?
I don't have block out blinds, I'll be honest. I don't. So for me, that complete darkness doesn't necessarily make too much of a difference. The temperature certainly does. See, I like to have my windows open a little bit. I like some air coming in. Yeah. So block out blinds. But I'll be honest too, I've never particularly had ongoing sleep issues. So for me, I haven't had to throw every single tool and every single strategy at it. I've found the ones that work. So, yeah.
Have you tracked sleep before?
No.
It's interesting. I think and I mean, you've been, obviously you're a mother, athlete, work with athletes, and you know.
But I don't want to track sleep.
Exactly. I'm still, one of the things I've always found, and I talk about it with so many athletes and those that are performing, not even the professional level, but the elite level that have had children. I read a lot, and I'm fascinated by sleep study and data and what sleep and hacking sleep. But I now, having had my own child, I do not understand how these techniques or methods solve for having a 1 to 3 year old.
They absolutely can't.
They can't. How is it possible? They've got to eat.
And I think that's lessons in there as well. Like, we know sleep is really important. We know it's critical. We know some of the the health complications or factors that can come from lack of sleep. But you don't need to overstress that, because as soon as you overstress it almost becomes more of a problem. And life happens. You're going to go through these periods where you aren't going to get much sleep, but you can still function. So you're still going to get through it. So I think there's a real balance. And even when you ask me about tracking sleep, I feel like people fall into two camps. You either want to know everything about what you're doing every minute of the day, or you're in a camp where I don't actually really need or want that data and happy to go with the flow, be a bit more intuitive with it. I don't think there's a right or wrong. It's just really what works for you.
How did you find, and maybe we can dive into that now a little bit, for parents in general, I don't want to say mothers, because, essentially fathers are in this boat as well. How, and some of the techniques, it's just quite frankly not possible to have the optimum, and we look at Aura, and they've got the recovery score, the optimal sleep score. In real life with young children, it's near impossible to get that unless one parent is putting their hand up and saying, I'm essentially going to run the ship here. What advice or what strategies do you have with young kids? Did you find, did you do anything? You work with athletes that have had young kids that are, what are they doing with sleep? It's one thing that I haven't heard much spoken about with it.
Because there's not much that you can do. You literally just have to roll with it. And I think when your kids are young, you sleep when you can sleep, and you go with it. Otherwise, there's kind of no way around it.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, my kids are 9 and 7, and they're still, up in the night. So you've got many years ahead of you.
They get sick.
They get sick, yeah.
So guys, this is the practicality about what we're saying. I'm obsessed with learning more about sleep and what we can do for it, and the nutrition and the supplements and the processes and the hygiene we can assist with. But this conversation today is about kind of talking about what we can do, and then actually talking about some of the inhibitors, and sometimes and not being afraid to not be perfect at this stuff as well, is kind of one of the points that we'd love to make as well, from this conversation. So darkness was a really interesting one. I think what we didn't touch on there, it's a very well known, very documented, obviously avoiding blue light, avoiding bright lights. I think one of the things that I think everyone can really easily do is they say, as you're an hour away from going to sleep, start to dim the lights in the house. It's Matt goes on and says you should be dimming every single light. Like, I definitely just go room by room. Definitely try and turn off the blue light. But I think the dimming of the lights and the shower for me work really well. I know Whoop have recently brought out these glasses. I'm not sure if I'll adopt those. About an hour before bed, you're meant to put the phone away and you whack on your Matrix glasses. I won't go to that extent, but that's the extent that some people do go to. I am a proponent of the eye mask when it comes to darkness, which is interesting. I know, but leading into it, I was when I was playing, I was earplugs, eye mask. My wife hated it. Her assumption, if there was an intruder, I'm not going to wake up. So again, practically, she's like, you are dead to the world when you go to bed. 20 minutes in, you've got your eye mask and your earplugs in. She goes, what happens if there's an intruder? And we live in a relatively safe area, but that's one that's a concern. She believes it. She's like, what? Yeah. She's like, well, you're meant to wake up to that.
Did you go the weighted blanket as well?
Oh, yeah. No, exactly. What's the weighted blanket?
No, use that?
No.
So again, it's something I've actually tried. I didn't particularly like, but there is a lot of research behind it, and a lot of people love it. So that weight, and you kind of think about when you're a baby and you're being held, and a bit of that, it's that same feeling. So it slows your heart rate, it calms your nervous system, and for a lot of people, it can work like magic.
But on the way, it's actually
it is weighted. Yep, it's weighted. The blanket itself is heavy, and there are new designs now where, of course, initially that could be quite hot. I've used it with a lot of athletes. Again, we had it in the footy clubs as well. For some of them, they absolutely loved it. It's a thing that worked for them. There are new ones now where it's the same weight but much more breathable.
Okay, interesting. I know there's an amazing technology which I would love to try one day. In the States, it's like a thermic sheet that you can code. So going back to temperature, you can have it. You can set it like it's like I suppose it's like an electric blanket which have been around for forever, but you can set the temperature and it'll drop over the course of 15, 20 minutes. It's literally to try and solve for that temperature drop, have you fall asleep. I would love to try it. My hands on them. They're probably very expensive. I think that would be very cool. Again, maybe taking it too far, but if there's science behind someone along that, which is very cool. There's and look, I'd be really interested if anyone has tried one of those to let me know what they're like. I'm really keen to find out.
I agree. I'd love to try it, and I'm sure that it works really, really well. It's probably that question too, isn't it, of budget? And how many strategies can you throw at a person at once? And I always wonder too, if that works for you, that's great. But if that's your go-to, but you haven't addressed some of these other things, are you are you up for 20 hours of the day and then using your cool sheet and expecting to get good sleep, or are you sitting in an office all day and expecting your call sheet is going to make you work? Like, address the big things first before you go and throw money at some of these other solutions.
Yeah, I think it's exactly horse before the cart stuff, isn't it? It's trying to get the big box look, and then these are the next level that you can go and do. Yeah, exactly, the glitter. But look, so going back to it practically, if you can't get blockout blinds, they are most likely the best scenario. Eye mask is another option, which I know a lot of people do adopt. I do enjoy it. It's worked for me definitely works on planes and travel, which is fantastic. An eye mask, for whatever reason, it obviously does. And I think when you obviously remove those bright lights, you can start to trigger that melatonin, that sleepiness as well, which is what you want to do with the darkness. The fourth point that I found really interesting, definitely I'm guilty of this, is Matt was saying that do not stay in bed if you are not asleep, which I think a lot of people would be guilty of, both in the morning and the evening. And I think when everyone has those nights when it's just not your night, you're lying there and 25 minutes in, you might have thought you were tired, but you just want to sleep. Recommendation in best practice says if it's been around 25 minutes and you're not asleep, get up, leave your bedroom, go to another room, train your body that when you're in your bedroom, you sleep. I think there are so many, me definitely, I just think, no, I've got to stay here. Bust it through, exactly. And in the morning, you sit there and you're like, I'd love to be out. I can't believe I've woken up and it's, it's a Sunday and it's 5:30, I'm awake. I'm just going to lie here and hopefully I'll go back to bed, and you just don't.
I agree with you. I've heard that recommendation as well. And regardless of what time it is, it holds true. They say even if you wake at 2 a.m. and you're awake for that more than that 20, 25 minutes, then get up and go and do something, which I always find really surprising. But then again, I'm not often awake for that long in the middle of the night.
That's a good way to do it. Maybe you leave a book in another room.
Yeah.
Leave your book in your lounge room that, is dark. You wake up, go and put your book there. It's definitely not something I'd like to start to try. Again, I don't think I've been awake for 25 minutes. That's definitely not something I've struggled with. But when those rare times happen, I definitely don't have that urge to get out of bed. But that is a really, it is part of one of the key pieces of advice that come out of while we sleep is, don't stay in bed if you're not asleep. So quite a simple one, but it is one of the more, easily adoptable ones if you do suffer with that. Interestingly, Matt does have a couple of non-conventional tips, which I find, again, I think a lot of people would find them quite. I think the first one being, I'm going to dive in. The first one is, he says if you've had a bad night's sleep, beautiful thing, if you're tracking sleep, you'll know you wake up and you get that real disappointment. If you've had a bad night's sleep, the advice is do nothing. Do nothing to alter what's gone in the past is gone. Don't wake up any earlier. Don't wake up any later. Don't have more naps. Don't have more caffeine to overcompensate. Just kind of write and let that night's sleep go and said it wasn't for me. And he said the advice is to just try and push through as best possible throughout that day. And then again, don't change anything. Don't go to bed any earlier that following evening, which I think for me is something that I'd never realized. When he said this, I was like, interesting, because again, it's counterintuitive to everything he said. Caffeine consumption, circadian rhythm cycles, darkness, nap time. He's just like, sometimes you don't sleep as well, and unfortunately you can't catch up what you've missed out on. So that was an interesting one. Do you nap if you've had a bad sleep? Do you actively go out of bad sleep to try and correct it?
I mean, I find the question of naps a really interesting one. These days, no, like I don't have time to nap. Most people I know, I don't live the professional athlete life anymore. I would have used to have napped for sure. And particularly if I'd had a bad night's sleep, or you're training that many hours a day, an afternoon nap. But I'm interested too, did he have recommendations around, if you can't nap, even taking 10 minutes to sit restfully or close your eyes restfully?
He says no naps, ideally after 1 p.m.
Okay.
I don't know, who naps before 1 p.m.?
Does that?
I don't know, but my mum is one of the greatest nappers I know, and I know there's a lot of. I do know there's plenty. I mean, half of our tea room playing was they were lunchtime. It was like eating, and then it was like a siesta time. I mean, who naps? I mean, half of Europe nap. It's interesting.
You're right. I haven't nap. They're
definitely not napping before one. So it's interesting that the science says don't nap after one. I mean, I think there's a huge population, a whole part of the world that doesn't follow, which is, again, really, really interesting, right? One is early.
I guess there's a lot of individual nuance though too. Whether it's sleep.
How do you practically fit in a nap pre-one? I can understand, and I know it's quite practical for some to. They'll have, if you've trained early in the morning, then you've got a mid-morning session. You eat. Most likely, there'll be a lot of times where you'll eat lunch and then there'll be a 20, 25-minute nap in there. Some I know will put a shot of coffee in before that, have the 25-minute nap, and then go. Yeah, I just can't. I can't. I'd love to talk to someone who tell me how you fit in the nap pre 1 p.m.
Well, I mean, the other thing I was trying to get my head around is, I mean, we throw this number around of 8 hours sleep or 7 to 9 hours sleep, which is a little bit of a, in some ways, a made up round number. But for athletes, they throw out this number of, if you're training 4 to 6 hours a day, which for a lot of endurance athletes or even team sport athletes, you'd be getting to that mark. The sleep recommendation is 10 to 12 hours, which I kind of look at your day and I don't know how you even fit 12 hours of sleep in your day.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It would be very interesting to have I suppose, an endurance coach, like an Ironman coach here. I'd love to talk to a Matt Dixon, Dan Plews, one of these guys who've got a lot of athletes, age groupers with real life, responsibility that are doing full Iron or training for full Ironman under a program that has a lot of hours in it.
Yeah.
To work out how you scheduling in sleep for optimal performance in and around actual life. And where I suppose it's I'd love to just know what is the sacrifice?
Yeah, or where are you making it up? Because one of the other strategies that I know research is starting to look at, or there is some research around, is this concept of sleep banking or pre-sleep. So if you generally have around that 8 hours of sleep, I clearly didn't get that last night, but you're also combining that with your training program and you're combining it with life responsibilities. And so on paper, you should be pushing higher numbers of sleep than that. There's this concept that in that week or two leading into your event, that if you are getting those numbers, so you are getting more sleep than you routinely would, that you start to get some of those performance benefits. I don't know enough about that, but it'd be if that's a strategy, that you can deploy to have these purposeful periods of extra sleep, which again goes against your first point of that really regular sleep-wake times.
Yeah, I agree. And it also if you put it back on it as well, when you talk about practicing ideal scenarios for performance, if you're starting every single year I watch the Australian Open, I just cannot understand when those players, some of them have to walk out on court knowing they've got best of 3 set game and they're walking out at 9:30 at night.
Yeah.
And I would love to talk to them and say, how much training or preparation do they do about performing at that hour of the day? I'm sure they do a lot. They're too professional not to. Same with the footballers. I know, like Thursday night in European soccer, they do their afternoon training. Their Thursday night, 2 days before a game, is preparation for that. So they'll go into the facility at maybe 3 p.m. and they'll leave at 9:30.
Yeah. I mean, when you think about swimmers, I think that they get very used to the finals at night.
Yeah.
But then when they go into Olympics and you're on that different schedule where, because for broadcasting rights, they're having finals in the morning. I think for them, that's a complete shift around. So they're having to shift their whole, body performance-wise.
Yeah, and then yet they do most of I know they do most of their time work in the afternoon sessions, have all their endurance stuff in the morning. Yeah. But again, it's very interesting, particularly for a sprinter, trying to flip that around. I think, and they're talking about that performance with sleep and matching it, and we're talking about the very elite level here. Understanding how you practically, or the very top end of sport, does practice and train for that would be quite unique. And potentially, I think around those times, Olympics, like you listen to stories. I think it was this year, Ariane Titmus, she had the 200, won the gold, and then I think she said she barely slept for 2 days. Yeah. Literally, but then backed it up with the 200. Yeah. Again, best race, she broke a personal best, gold medal again, nearly got the world record, barely slept. It's just, it's amazing running off something else. And it's amazing when you think about it like that as well.
But yeah, I think, and it'd be interesting to speak to those swimmers in a bit more depth about that and how they get back, back to their hotels, maybe 2, 3 a.m. in the morning after these finals events. You've gone through drug testing, you've gone through media and warm down, getting back, you're competing again the next morning. You've got to get to sleep. Then they go and compete in the morning, come back during the day, got to get some more sleep and rest in. I mean, they must get pretty used to being able to capturing those small periods of good sleep.
Yeah, I think when you think about sweat, I think when the two sports, I think at a meet, let's say an Olympics for swimming, and then I think tennis are the two that would have to have them very dialed in. Like you think of the course over a 2-week period, if you're having night match after night match after night match in tennis, you're finishing the match, as you've said, there's recovery, you've got to eat, you've got to do your drug testing. They're not getting back to the hotel till 2 a.m. They're probably sleeping until maybe 10 again, somehow with blockout blinds. These guys and girls would be adapting every strategy under the sun. Because when you think about even that is the beautiful thing about ultra, endurance triathlon, Ironman triathlon, rarely do you have to back it up.
No.
You put it out there, and then you're having a good solid week-off, That's what I mean. Yeah, a few months, which is rare. And then even in track and field, very few, there's not that many athletes will do 8 events like in swimming, whereas they have a good, a 10-day period where they're just putting it night after night after night. So I think swimming, it's a really interesting one. I'd love to, maybe that's another guest. We need to get a swimmer on and talk through what it's like, particularly one of those ones that swim 4 or 5 multiple events and you throw the relays in there.
Yeah.
It'd be a really interesting one to chat about.
So you're right. Those sort of athletes, all of these strategies, take them all. They need every single one. But for us, we don't need.
No nap. Yeah. This is an interesting one, an unconventional one from Matt Walker. Don't count sheep. Guys, for parts of the world that don't know what that might mean, don't count sheep, meaning there's a strategy when you can't fall asleep. Obviously, you try and focus on something and you try and count to a certain number. And the theory is that you will never get to, say you want to count to 100, or counting sheep, they'll say 1 sheep, 2 sheep, 3 sheep. They'll say if you try and get to 100 or a number that you've got in your head, you'll never get to it because you'll fall asleep.
Have you ever?
I think I did it when I was young. Yeah.
But
But he said exactly, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. In fact, it actually makes things worse. He said the theory is take yourself for a mental walk. So you do, essentially, what you do takes your mind off trying to fall asleep. Mental walk is an interesting one. Take yourself like through a part of your neighborhood or a walk that you like to take to your local coffee shop. If you take yourself there mentally, that's a better option than imagining sheep going across. For those of you who potentially do that and wonder why it's not walking. So one of the best neuroscientists says don't do that as well. So
the interesting one, a mental walk. Yeah, I must admit, the times when I do have more challenge getting to sleep is if you've got something that's running around your head. You might have had a busy day, you've had some issues come up that day or problems to solve, work related things you're trying to figure out, and they're still running around your head. It certainly works for me to, in that period before bed, just to take the time to write a list for the next day. This is what I've got to do. This is what I've got to sort through. And that kind of puts it to the side for me. Otherwise, I'll keep thinking about it.
I'm definitely like that. Get the notebook out. And I find it hard to switch off from work at the moment. So I'll literally just write it down. And it's also, your to-do list on, you have your life column, you have your work column. And I try and do that. You try and do that, close it up. That definitely is a strategy that works for me, kind of. And for those of you out there, again, who maybe haven't used that, it's an amazing technique to just compartmentalize these thoughts that might be sitting in your head as you go to bed. And that's my routine, and I'll let people in. It's do the journal. And I actually do that. Some people do it right while they're in bed. I actually do it before I start my routine. So I'll literally have the journal. I'll go to the kitchen. I'll have my magnesium. Then I'll walk upstairs, go to the bathroom, teeth, lights are already off by about that time, about an hour before bed, dim lights. And then I'll be teeth, shower, in bed. That's it. Yeah, that's a simple one. Do you follow any?
That sounds fairly similar. Yeah. I'm probably just not as, ordered. All of that stuff happens, but it doesn't have to be in that rigid order. Yeah.
So I'm going to say them again. Tick them off on your, let's rank them 1 to 5. That's a good one. If you don't have them, let's just rank them in terms of what you would put in your, and purely this is just you and I talking, so there's no right or wrong answers. Regularity, so the sleeping schedule.
I do that without thinking about that. Yeah.
Okay, but important.
Yeah.
Few and practical.
Yeah.
Yep. Temperature.
Very important.
That's a big one.
Yeah. You cannot sleep in a hot room.
And your windows open, your fresh air.
I like to have windows open. Yeah. And I like cool and then blankets.
I think it's an Australian thing as well. We live in a climate that allows that quite frequently throughout the year. We don't particularly where you live, it doesn't get freezing cold in the middle of winter. So we're just used to, you can have it open all the time. And I think a lot of people as well don't like being in air conditioner. Some people don't, that doesn't work well for them from a respiratory perspective. Mm. Some people prefer to have natural temperature coming through. Okay, temperature important. Darkness.
Not so much complete darkness, but what is important for me is the morning light.
Yeah, I'm the same, without a doubt, which again, I find I get up much earlier than my wife, and so have to somehow literally, I'd love to be able to just, do the Ace Ventura, just straight in the morning, like into being, you watch all those movies of those guys, they're sitting on the cliff top in their mansions and they clap and that would be amazing. Yeah, I don't have that. You've got that at Linux, don't you? Yeah. 4 is don't stay in bed. You can't sleep.
It's not something that comes up for me.
I did that one there. I find that one surprised me that it was in the top 5 pieces of advice, but it's there. I'm with you. Not as important for me. And 5 is caffeine and alcohol. No alcohol, obviously. In the evening, no caffeine. No caffeine. It says avoid drinking alcohol in the evening period, and no caffeine from around 12.
Yeah, I reckon I do both of those. I would notice. Yeah, for sure. I would notice that affect my sleep. So I love coffee. I will absolutely every day have 2 double shots, but they will be in the morning. So that's not an insignificant amount of caffeine, but I know as soon as I start to push that anywhere near afternoon, even from midday, that it will affect my sleep. Did he have what I'm really curious too about some other ones? Did he have any recommendations around exercise?
He didn't actually have it in that book. He's actually about to dive into it in his podcast, which is very interesting, and it's going to break it up into a 3-part series, which I'm very keen to listen to, because I think it's a whole nother discussion that we would love to have. I think exercise, sleep, performance. So he's doing it in 2 separate. It says what does exercise do to sleep performance, and then he's reversing it. What does sleep do to performance? So he's going to do both sides of it, which I think is going to be a really interesting one.
Yeah.
That I think a lot of athletes should listen to, which is interesting, because he'll go, there's exercising for health and wellness, and then there's a performance element that obviously we're going to dial into. Yeah. And I'm keen to listen to that, but no, he hasn't gone into it yet. It'll be interesting.
Because it's really, I think that there is a lot of research, and right, that a level of exercise and a level of training is a key part of that cycle.
Yeah.
But then again, high intensity exercise in that evening before you go to sleep, that's a killer.
Yeah.
So that's going to push your sleep cycles back too. And because it raises your core body temperature so much and for so long, so you're not getting that cooling off period. So
we'll find out.
Yeah.
That is 40 minutes. 40 minutes we've got, guys. Thank you, Pip. I think that'll wrap us up. Everyone, thank you. Hope you guys got something out of that. That was a more informal chat about what Pip and I have practiced in our own personal time, and obviously what's worked for us. And hopefully, for those of you who wanted to learn more about what I suppose Matt Walker talks about, or the How They Sleep book, I'll get Jared to put some of the links to maybe some of his TED Talks in there as well, and his podcast, because it goes into far more detail than we were talking about. Remember, guys, if you enjoyed the episode, we'd love a review on Apple or Spotify podcasts. But Pip, hopefully we'll see us together very shortly, and we'll dive into the exercise and sleep.
Nice.
Thanks, guys.